Great. Thanks, Sophie. Afternoon, everybody. So very quick note about CJK for those of you who haven't come across us before. We've been going in the sector, I think it's about 9 years now. Um, and we spend a lot of our time working with multi-academy trusts on everything from mergers and expansion and growth to where are we now with our operating model. We do a lot of benchmarking. We support with strategy development. We have our own research panel, which is behind some of the work we'll be presenting today. We also spend time working with investors and ed tech to make sure the systems and services being offered are going to meet your needs. So that is us, and I'll provide some contact details at the end if you'd like to hear any more about that. On to the research. Now, as Sophie says, this will be interactive, but just in a little while. First of all, I'm just going to give you a readout of what we found from this year's research, and that'll probably take me about 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. And then I'm going to hand over to John, and he's going to facilitate a discussion with you about what we've found. So there is a little bit of listening just for a bit, but I hope, like me, you'll find the findings are pretty interesting in their own right and worth hearing before we get into discussion. So just a bit of background. We do an annual survey of trust mergers and transfers. I can't quite believe it's a year since our last one. We got 245 responses for this one, which is a healthy number. And as you can see, they come from senior leaders at both school and trust level. At school level, it's academy principals and heads who respond, and at trust level, it's central senior staff. Responses come from CST members. We are platinum partners with CST, so thank you ever so much for your responses if you gave one through that. We also have partners School Zone, and we commissioned them to also provide their panel for responses. So thank you also if you responded through that route. Why do we do this? Well, first of all, we are appointed by CST to lead the mergers and transfers masterclasses for them. Secondly, we are ourselves working with many trusts right now on mergers and transfers right through the whole process from finding a partner to successful go live. And so for both those reasons, we really want to help our clients and our masterclass students learn from all the wisdom of the sector, and not just from the ones that we happen to be working with ourselves. So this gives us a much broader knowledge base that we can then bring to you, so that we can all learn from what's been done before. And I guess more generally, we are CST Platinum partners, and we see this research program and the articles and white papers, which you can find on our website, as part of our giving back to a sector which most of our team have lived in this sector for much of our careers, including myself. So it's nice to contribute something back. So that's the basis of the research. So last year, when we did this survey, this is where we were at. 35% of our respondents had been through a merger. 10% were in flight. They were in the middle of a merger right now. And 43% hadn't experienced one of any kind in terms of a similar panel of trust leaders. This year, things have changed. Nearly half the sector has now been through a merger. A similar number are in progress, and the number who've yet to experience a merger or a transfer has come down, probably not surprisingly, by a sort of similar-ish number to the increase in those who've been through one. So in really simple terms, about 10 to 15% of our sector appears to be in the process of a merger at any one point in time. And that means a steadily diminishing number of people who haven't been through one, and a steadily increasing number who have been. In fact, if you sort of take that line and extrapolate it, probably in 3 or 4 years' time, it'll be very hard to find people who haven't experienced a merger in our sector. That's how prevalent it is. Just breaking into the data a little bit more, focusing on this year's data, just sort of breaking out that. We mentioned 12% are currently in a process. If I look at those who've been through a merger, for 20% of people, it was a merger of 2 or more trusts. So a sort of a full merger, as it were, a merger of equals. For about 30%, the majority of that 50% have experienced one. It was more what you might call a transfer, where a smaller trust joined into a larger one. So that is sort of the predominant model, rather than a sort of merger of equal sized trusts. And then, as we mentioned, about 6% have explored a merger, but it didn't go ahead. And again, if we break out those who haven't experienced a merger, actually only 9% haven't experienced any form of merger or trust transfer, but 24% have experienced a single school joining a trust, which, in our research, we kind of defined as not a merger, but just a single school joining. So actually, the numbers who've experienced no kind of merger or transfer is only 9%, but 24% have sort of experienced a SAT joining a trust. So that's where we are now. Most people have been through one, not everybody, but the number is increasing all the time. So we better get them right, because it's obviously going to impact on hundreds of thousands of students across the country in due course. So first of all, let's just look at sort of the shape of mergers, who's leading them, what's happening when they lead a merger. And we found that CEOs were usually leading the change in terms of the mergers that we found. Trustees or other leaders rarely led them, but they were almost always consulted or informed about it. You can see the little grey bits of the people who were neither consulted nor informed and not directly affected by it. And a little bit of red there, which we thought was a bad sort of place to be, which is I wasn't consulted or informed, but I was directly affected. But note that we only had 11 trustees, because we were more using the CST panel, which is probably fuller of executives. So, I mean, that red blob is one person, just to put that in perspective. But interesting to see one person did have that experience, but it's pretty rare. Now, we know that being in that leadership position, we know from our data here, that has a big impact on how you feel about the merger. So we asked people thinking about the merger you've been through, and this was now at this point only people who've actually been through a merger. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend your merger or transfer process to another trust considering a similar change? So the banded colours from red through to green are the percentages who voted 0 up to 10, obviously 0 being a bad thing and 10 being a good thing on this scale. So you can see, a bit more red and orange over on the right-hand side, where people were informed rather than leading the change. We also converted that into what they call a net promoter score, which is normally used around product quality, but it's quite useful here. And it's basically getting those who were real advocates for the process and subtracting those who were real detractors for the process. If you were launching a product, you'd want your product to have a positive net promoter score, with about 50 being considered good and 50 to 100 being considered excellent. The average score here for those leading the change was a 0. So kind of promoters were equal to detractors. If we move into those who were only consulted about it, it's a score of -35. So those who would be detractors to the process outweighed those who were in favour of it by 35%. And if we move through from people being consulted to those who were only informed, it was -54%. And so, that is quite a low score in net promoter terms. Now, this webinar is not to make us gloomy, because what we're going to do is dive into, yes, learning the lessons where scores were quite low, but also these are just averages, and there's plenty of occasions where scores were very high, even for people who weren't leading the change. And we'll look at what were the conditions for success. But look, we all want to have our eyes open and understand that it's not always going to be the success we want it to be, and we need to learn how to make it the best it can be. Next, sort of dynamic that seems to influence how people feel about the merger. Probably not surprising, but interested to see it in the data. If you're in a trust where another trust joins into yours, you're likely to be more positive than in a merger where two trusts join on a relatively equal footing, and the hardest people to get a positive score from are those where they said our trust joined into another trust. Those differences are not huge, but they are kind of in line with what you would expect. And we are seeing, that sort of harder to get a good outcome for people where they said our trust joined into another trust. And obviously, for those of you leading mergers, you don't want that to be the case. And so, again, this research is going to help us understand what are the conditions for success, whatever the dynamic, whether people are leading or being consulted or informed, and whether their trust is joining into another trust or it's a merger of equals. How do we get the best success? So that's some framing. Now, the way we're going to look at the evidence is in line with our CJK merger framework, which we use in our masterclasses and also where we're directly supporting trusts to go through these stages and maximize their chances of success. So we're going to look at strategic alignment and feasibility, and then getting the due diligence and business case right, then getting ready for day one with the design and transition planning, and then day one go live, and what happens after day one in terms of embedding and
Oh, I'm not sure what's happened there. Chris has disappeared mid-flow. It's very odd. Hopefully he'll come back in just a second. Not sure what's happened. Apologise. He is coming back in.
Hello. Sorry, my my internet connection just decided to die on me at the most inopportune moment, but we're back now. So let me just find that slide, and let's continue as if nothing happened. Into that first stage of activity. So finding a partner and leading the change. And across those 8 stages I just showed you, we've basically shown you at the top of each one, basically where was this stage ranked on average. So these stages were quite highly ranked, second and third, in terms of how positive people felt about the different stages on average. Big caveat on all of these. These are average experiences, and what's important is to dive into the detail and see where people had unusually positive experiences or unusually negative experiences. So looking at the data around identifying and selecting the right partner and leading the case for merger, what were people saying where they gave that high scores? Well, it seemed that the themes were around spending time on a shared educational vision and strategic purpose. We would expect that. Trust and openness between leadership teams. We would expect that, but that is not always as easy to achieve in the dynamics of a merger as you might hope. Honest conversations about culture before getting into structures, and leaders investing time in whether organizations were genuinely compatible. And so I would say, do spend time understanding culture and not just capability. Do spend time testing whether leadership teams genuinely sort of get on and trust each other. Often there may be a kind of relationship between, say, two CEOs, but for a really successful merger, building that relationship more deeply is important. And be honest about long-term educational ambitions. I guess in terms of don't just think about the financial logic. Do really think about the cultural fit. Don't underestimate the importance of the sense of organizational identity to your teams, and especially for those doing the transferring in, and how that's going to change as they move into the new organization. And don't rush this stage. A few really good quotes there. So, here's an academy principal who was informed. They didn't lead it or were consulted, but they felt very positive about the change because there was strong communication, trust, a clear shared purpose from the outset. Um, and here's someone who joined into another trust, the CEO leading that change. And again, they felt very positive. They would recommend the approach, and they felt the work on culture and values and bringing senior leaders and trustees together was particularly strong. Um, on the other hand, here's somebody who scored a 4 in terms of that 0 to 10 in terms of recommending the process. They were consulted as their trust joined into another trust, and they said uncertainties around leadership, divergent values and culture led to key staff leaving. Some risks to be aware of and not let happen in your own mergers. Moving on to the next stage around consultation and communication. Consultation with staff was the 5th ranked of the 8 stages that we looked at, and consultation with the wider community was actually ranked lowest by people. As you can see, there's plenty of green on there, but on average across all the scores, too much red and amber and pink there, and an area that with hindsight people would want to improve. I mean, the quotes here are great. The process was well managed with clear communication, timely updates, opportunities for staff input, built trust, reduced uncertainty, ensured colleagues felt informed and supported through the transition. Great. Consultation with staff sought to answer questions properly, some co-working in the run-up, help with transition. So not just passive receiving, but actually co-working to develop. We've seen time and time again how important that can be. On the other side, challenges, liaison with stakeholders felt done to rather than consulted meaningfully. And management of change around decisions could have been improved. Information was late, decisions already made, staff uncertain or unable to prepare, and things we want to avoid. So, do engage early, do explain why decisions are being made, and do keep people informed throughout. I think don't confuse communication with consultation. One is two-way and one is just pushing messages out. And I think don't wait until plans are completely nailed down before engaging people. And I realize it's tricky in terms of balancing that circle of trust as you start to develop your plans. Tricky, but not impossible to get that right. Next stage, due diligence. This was actually ranked first of all the stages. Which is not to be complacent about it. There's a bit of red and pink there, but for a lot of people, this was a stage that they felt happier about. Done carefully by a team of experts, time given over to getting it right. Due diligence process well handled. And a single set of questions for both trusts, cultural mapping, very helpful. Identification of system rationalization was effective. Clarity of purpose, defined outcomes. Great. On challenges, making sure it had been completed and sort of building conditions and financial status coming out late in the day or not during the due diligence process. Interesting one here. Ultimately, the diligence didn't flush out that there was a cultural mismatch. Too much attention on geography alignment and values alignment and not really thinking about culture and approach and sort of looking deeper into that quote around getting the two teams together and really realizing sort of culturally, can we actually work together as two teams? So really, really important learning there. So don't just treat due diligence as a compliance exercise. Don't ignore issues just because they're uncomfortable.
Oh, Chris,
yes,
you've lost the slides. Sorry.
So I have lost screen sharing, right? Maybe because I readmitted myself.
Okay.
Would you mind giving it back to me? Thank you.
Yeah. Hang on a second.
Sorry all for our brief technical hitch.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, got it back. No, that's all right. It wasn't you or me. It was something weird in the ether. Can everyone see those again now?
Yeah.
Great. Let me know if they go again. Thank you. Okay. Next step. I mean, we've kind of mashed 3 steps into one here in the interests of brevity, and there's a lot of work involved in these 3, but systems alignment, getting ready for day 1, go live, and then post transfer or merger integration. As you can see, kind of alignment of organization systems was ranked 7th, so kind of the nearly the lowest ranked of all the different stages you'll take, and readiness was ranked 6th. So 2 stages that people might feel few. We've got DFE's application approved. Our trust board have said yes. Great, we're nearly there. Well, actually, there's some really hard work in this stage and quite a few things that can go right and some things that can go wrong. So I think getting joint working going is as much of a focus as kind of getting all the legal and sort of document completion worked out, thinking in detail about the operational design, how onboarding is going to work, how your systems are going to align. That's not to say you have to align everything on day 1, and I think it can be a mistake too, but you want a really clear plan about what can be aligned, what can't be, and when it's going to happen. Program management right through the process, including after day 1 has happened. Think of this as a change process, not an event. Explicitly plan your team formation. We would always recommend once you've got DFE approval, get your joined up organizational design in place. We've worked with trusts who've called us in after merger to do the design at that point, and generally it's been a recipe for quite a lot of confusion and difficulty that can go on for a year or so. Much better to have that clear plan before day 1, implement as much as you can before day 1, and the rest have a clear plan for afterwards. Don't assume it's just going to happen naturally, and don't sort of disband your change oversight once the legal merger is complete. Keep that going afterwards. So, some good things we heard: leadership maintain clear vision and direction, careful planning, day 1, minimize disruption to schools, solid foundation for transition, continuity for pupils. Great. Due diligence, open and transparent, consultation, answered questions, co-working in the run-up, help with transition. Good stuff. Couple of challenges: unknowns on day 1, sorted out in due course, but not for day 1, which caused anxiety. We don't want to do that. The team was formed by just bringing teams together and didn't take account of team formation or mapping the systems or processes. We certainly wouldn't encourage that in trusts that we were working with, and I wouldn't recommend any of you approach day 1 in that way. We do hear people sort of talk about a soft merger. We're just going to get the legal stuff done. We'll leave everything else as it is because it feels like you're pacing out the management of change. I understand why people do it. I'd thoroughly, really recommend that you don't. And I think if you speak to any trust leader who's done it like that the first time, they very rarely do it like that a second time, because it's so important to have clarity. Okay, well, let's sort of think about what happens after we've been through those stages. So we asked people about achieving benefits. And we asked a sort of simple but quite powerful set of questions. So we asked people before the merger or transfer happened, what importance was given to each of the benefits. I'll show you what those were in a second. And then we asked a separate question following the merger or transfer: to what extent have the following benefits been achieved? We plot them on this chart. So if it's above and to the left, that would mean that expectations were exceeded. So the achievements were higher than the importance attached. If it's below and to the right, it means expectations weren't met. And these are averages. This isn't true for every individual, but this is the average for each of these benefits. Okay, so I mean, you can see instantly that there weren't any benefits where people's expectations in terms of importance of it before was exceeded. On average, there are individual cases, plenty of them, where it was, but on average for each benefit it wasn't. Clearly we'll delve in a second to those who did exceed them and learn from that. You can also see that improving academic outcomes for pupils and achieving economies of scale are essentially furthest from the line. If you take a direct line from the dot to the dashed line. So those are the areas where the expectations were highest and the achievements weren't in line. Although in absolute terms, achieving economy of scale was sort of second highest rated, but it was also seen as so important beforehand that that's why it doesn't kind of get above the line. So let's just have a look at those where benefits did exceed expectations. We dived into the data and sort of pulled out some themes there. They were trusts who also said that there was investment after day one, where they've got lots of green ticks on all the other stages we've just looked through. So they'd set the conditions for success. They talked about celebrating early successes, and they talked about having a positive plan for reviewing the benefits and making sure they were succeeded. So with some themes there, and some statements here: greater collaboration, stronger improvement support, increased professional development for staff, improved financial resilience, all exceeded expectation. Merger enabled to access expertise that wasn't available previously, schools better supported, leaders worked together more effectively, much more resilient as an organisation. And that's coming from a principal whose trust transferred into another trust, and they're really obviously delighted with the outcome of that, and their expectations were exceeded. So that's where we want to be. And as I say, that's largely about getting green ticks all the way along in the things we've looked at so far. For those where the benefits weren't met, let's say not yet met, shared vision not fully realised, neither as work on curriculum or achievement of pupils. Staff and wider community not sufficiently involved, following transfer, aligning cultures, systems, ways of working took longer. More communication, change management, ongoing support after day one would have helped get a better transition. And that's where somebody kind of was scoring pretty low on expectations being met. So in terms of sort of things to learn from, don't expect overnight cultural change by accident. You have to work at it. Don't assume the merger is complete because the legal process is. The trust dividend, you'll get it through sustained leadership and not just through merger in itself, which is just a legal act. Okay, so we asked people what were the risks which became issues. We've previously published work on what people say are the risks of merger, but this is more interesting because this is people who've been through a merger listing it risks which became issues. And as you can see, identity, voice and autonomy was the number one risk that became an issue. Staff engagement, consultation, the next one, unclear roles, governance or decision making, a culture clash, uneven resource allocation between schools or increased bureaucracy. Couple of quotes there. Main issue related to communication and clarity around some decisions, timelines and changes to rollout process. Consistency and earlier communication would have helped. It took 2 years to settle into a clear understanding of the role of trust executives. So look, I mean, this is not unusual. It's not unique to trusts. It's typical of mergers in any sector. But the thing is, we're educating students and we want to do our very best to get it right every time. And that really is why, we want to share this research and teach the masterclass and support trusts. So 2 summary slides from me, and then I'm going to hand over to John and pray that John's communication challenges he was having just before the meeting have been solved and he's got sound and light. So 2 slides. First of all, what were the ingredients for success? So I really was most interested to look at, if you like, the toughest cases to please, which is people who don't lead the merger and whose trust transferred into another trust, and who then kind of gave a very high recommendation on the experience. And I've just done it through quotes rather than, anything from me. So New Trust was organized, honest and competent. They managed the merger very well. So just, good executive leadership and management, explaining the reasons, reassurance to staff, everything was going to be okay. Appointment of leaders, transfer, availability of HR. That's so important. What did people value afterwards? So the benefits, really, collaborative learning. So actually, when you look at it, a lot of it is about people, collaborative learning, opportunity to work with other subject leaders, shared practice at school level, networking, that's about people. Line management, very effective, also about people. Holistic support, mostly people. Collaborative working across schools, people. Coherence of a shared vision and working better and more productivity. So that it's interesting when people reflect, a lot of what people are going to value is the other people that they are now working with. So opportunities to get them together will really help to push your merger along. And then I've just pulled together from the research what I would think of as 5 leadership disciplines for successful mergers and transfers. So first, I'm thinking about that quote we read about what was looked at and what wasn't looked at in the process. And actually, the culture and the operating model, not just the values and geography. I've got the quote here, actually. Let me read it to you. We looked at geographical alignment and values. However, stated organizational values are broadly pretty consistent between most trusts. Correct. And we should have looked deeper and assessed the cultural and approach to operating, as these were very different. So assessing how you actually work, which is really best done by getting teams together that will flesh that out. Use due diligence to build confidence as much as to ensure compliance. I think that's a really interesting finding from the research, which hadn't really struck me in that way before. Bring people with you through early meaningful engagement, not just communication. Prepare thoroughly for day one and beyond, and then recognize day one as the start of a new journey. Rather than phew, we got over the finish line, collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Keep leading until the trust dividends are visible in classrooms, teams, and communities would be my final sort of lesson that I think we can draw from this for successful mergers. So that's the research findings. I hope you found them useful. We're probably going to turn it into an article and a blog, and we'll share the slides as they are as well with those on the call. But I'm going to turn now to my friend and colleague, John, and hope that John has sound that works.
So Chris, John can't currently unmute his microphone.
Okay.
So I've got him on the phone here. He can hear you. Let's just see if John can speak, and I'm hoping this is going to work.
So, colleagues, good afternoon. Can you hear me, Sophie?
I can hear you. Can everybody hear John?
Yep, great. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. I mean, the more you can have the speaker right by your microphone, Sophie, and John can speak up, I think that will help. But yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so colleagues, this is the first time this has ever happened for me. I can't get into the call, so my apologies. But what I wanted to do is, as a leadership mentor, I work alongside numerous trusts across the country. And I think one of the things we need to think about is what's the problem we're trying to solve. So some of the sector issues that are really persistent and concussive for us in the education sector would probably be the following. To name financial sustainability with no change going forward, I think is really important. So what's the financial reality for each one of our organisations? Secondly, we know over the next 5 years, there's going to be a 7% decrease in primary admissions. So therefore, it's going to affect disproportionately 2,000 primary schools out of the 16,000, and likely that many of those will have to close. We're in a situation now where there has been an upward curve of SEN demand in the light of current provision, with some of those changes by the current government really being delayed over the next 2 to 3 years. So, for example, EHCPs are likely to be taken out or be completed or not being continued in 2030. So that period of change is a long change. We know that 50% of teachers, in terms of retention of teachers, 50% of new teachers will leave after 3 years. So it isn't so much a recruitment crisis, but it's definitely a retention crisis. Also, with the change in sector regulation and in the light of Ofsted, and how RISE has had to change its focus from the previous Ofsted to this one, means that leaders are sometimes having schools supported that won't necessarily be the focus of future RISE teams. And I think the reality for all of us who work in our communities, and particularly in disadvantaged communities, we know there's a backdrop in our society whereby 14 million or 14.4 million families live in poverty. So we can see there has been a widening of the disadvantage gap to the widest ever possible so far. And also there's a correlation increase in need to figures. So I think if you're in the education space currently, there are multiple challenges. And when we're looking at benefits of merger, we've got to be really clear in terms of our leadership back to our organisations. Well, what are the advantages and disadvantages? You've heard the research from Chris, and Chris shortly will be leading a discussion around some key questions and really invite some discussion. But if we think about communication, we've got to communicate back to our organisations. If we're proposing merger, what are the advantages? The evidence suggests that we can create a better entitlement for children. Secondly, that we'd be creating better leadership capacity. Thirdly, by leading larger organisations, there are more professional pathways by which to retain staff. And fourthly, that financial sustainability has been proven in the Creston Reeves benchmarking data that in actual fact we're in a situation where that financial sustainability has been proven through running larger trusts that they're more sustainable. So whilst in the sector issues there are a whole range of challenges, there are solutions that the consolidation process brings, and also more intelligent design geographically and financially for trusts. But I know that's when we're not in the business. So Chris is going to lead you through now some questions for discussion, which we'll then pose going forward.
Thanks very much, John. Thank you. Just want to get your reflections really on the research and sort of any additional thoughts that you want to share, and I will answer your question as well, Ben, in a second on the chat. But let me just ask some questions first of you all. As Sophie said, you can come off mute, and you could also just put thoughts in the chat. So the strongest mergers begin with shared educational purpose, cultural compatibility, and trusted leadership relationships, not just geographical or financial fit. If you think back to a merger, what's given you confidence that you've chosen the right partner, and what would you test more rigorously today? So let me just make sure I can see the chat. Be good to get a little bit of a discussion going around that topic. Give you a second. I know you thought you were just coming to listen. You didn't know we were going to ask you to have opinions on things as well, but we'd love to hear from you. Okay, Andrew, do you want to say a little bit more about your comment there on this? It might be that Andrew needs to be let off mute by Sophie. You're also on mute, Sophie.
Everyone should be able to unmute.
Okay.
I need to.
Andrew, are you able to unmute and have a chat to us, Andrew? Seems like Andrew can't. Let me come to Kerry. Hello, Kerry. Nice to see you again. Hiya.
So this is a single school intertrust, but I think it's relevant. And historically, so we've grown from 3 to 32 organisations. And one thing where a couple of mergers didn't work was, I think the last thing we looked at were things like estates. So yes, absolutely, it's really important to get that cultural alignment and build those relationships, but there are some things that are the you know, educationally, you can work around that, you can discuss that, you can collaborate on that. But if the roof's falling off and there isn't money to fix it, then that's something that can absolutely be a red flag for trustees in terms of mergers happening. So I think it's about working out what your red flags are as a trust, and then embracing those earlier in the process so that you don't get too far down the road before those emerge. So, you know, for us, there's some real red flags and some real guiding lights. So the first one is it cannot present any detriment to our existing schools. That's our absolute number one. And our number two is there must be added value both ways. So we test those first, and then we know for sure that it's worth everybody's time and effort and hope, because there's nothing worse than getting towards the end of a process. Years ago, we ended up making public announcements and then had to backtrack. So I think it's working out your non-negotiables, any red flags, and testing those quite early on.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kerry. That's super helpful.
I
Just
think I'm
seeing-
unmuted, Chris, if you can hear me.
Hello, Andrew. I can hear you loud and clear. Hello.
Hi, sorry about that.
That's
Senior
okay.
surfer's not so good with technology, but anyway. Yeah, the reason I've flagged that up is because we are currently in very early talks with another fairly local and small trust about whether we would go to a full merger or something short of. I would say that our trust board at this moment in time are pretty sceptical about what the added benefits of a full merger would be, with everything that comes with that, as opposed to something that falls short of that, like, for example, a formal partnership or an alliance. It would appear, at least to some at the moment, and including me, I'm not clear what the additional benefits are of going the whole hog into a full merger. So we're a mat of 3 schools, they're a mat of 2. We're very keen to collaborate. We're already doing that, but we're still, from our side at least, still well short of being convinced a full merger is the answer.
Yeah. Well, I can give a sort of a view from our own work. I mean, just first of all, in terms of your point that the presentation has been about a full merger, I mean, that is correct. I guess that was the theme of the research, but that, you know, it's still a good question to ask. So, I mean, first of all, I suppose you could equally say, why not stay as single academies and why come together into a small trust? And the answer might be, you know, firmer forms and deeper forms of collaboration. You're sharing leadership, you're sharing cost. You've got the opportunity to get more economy of scale. So all the reasons why you presumably wanted to form your smaller trust would be many of the same reasons why other people might want to form a larger trust. You're just taking all of that up a scale. You're not quite probably getting to the point, or maybe you are, where you can get SCA, but I suppose that's becoming the other structural reason why you might want to be bigger, because you could get more access to capital. You certainly, you know, could make sure that your leadership expertise can be, you know, spread across more schools for each expert that you have, and that's often very beneficial. More economy of scale, more buying power. But yeah, I mean, even at 5 schools, acknowledging that isn't a huge trust, so you'd sort of almost immediately have a decision about whether to stick at that or move to another size. Clearly, John might want to say more about this. DFE's white paper, you know, seemed to indicate that larger trusts are the way forwards, but as we know at the moment, not exactly clear how that might be made to happen. But it could just simply be the case that managing small trusts is getting harder and harder because of financial circumstances, and that is one reason why trusts are looking at it. But most of all the things we've just talked about in this research, the chance for staff to collaborate, to deepen subject expertise, and to maximise the benefits to pupils, you know, would be the reasons for it. John, is something you
Sorry,
would
yeah, go on.
about?
Sorry, John.
Oh, we need to get you via the two-way link via Sophie's laptop.
Yeah, it should be able to go now, John.
There you go, via Houston.
So there's a really simple. There's a really simple way to review this. That when you brought your first trust together and you had 3 schools and the other had 2 schools, you're probably bringing them together with a really simple theory that we're greater by the sum of our parts. We've got more people, we've got more expertise, we've got the best evidence-based processes. And I think what happens sometimes is there's a tendency to create islands in the education space when actually we're stronger together. And I think if we view ourselves as a teaching profession, we should really focus on evidence-based processes rather than lots of different schools making things up in different ways. And I think, unlike, for example, the medical world, we are under direct ministerial control, and there is successive and concussive changes made by different ministers trying to make their own different changes. When actually, the more and more, I think, trusts come together with more of a voice, we become more powerful in the sector. But also, I think, hopefully in time, we'll be able to get to a place where we can actually set the agenda ourselves. But we need the power and the opportunity and the collective wisdom to be able to do that, if that's helpful. Because I think this is about systems leadership. And the more schools that are working together collaboratively, the better. And sometimes a lot of people talk about alignment and autonomy, but I think the space that we're all in as a teaching profession is in a space of collaboration. And how can we collaborate with the highest and most expansive level of expertise, if that's helpful?
I mean, to be clear, we're very clear. We're very keen on collaboration. We can see lots and lots of opportunities with this other trust. As I've just said, the question for us is we need to fully understand exactly what the added benefits are of making that final step to a full merger. Because from where we're sitting now, we can see loads of great opportunities which tick lots of the boxes you guys have mentioned, and it's all about the kids, of course. This other trust would give us access to some higher education organisations, which we see great benefit in. The question is, do we need to go the whole hog to actually realise those benefits?
Well, if there's one governance structure, then you're able to accelerate the process of decision making more quickly. I mean, Johnny Watham, who's in the sidebars, written about the fact that we need a clear shared vision and common goals for the future. I think the real question for you and your 2 sets of schools is, what's the vision of your organisation and what do you want to achieve for the children? And maybe pivot some of the conversations about that. What will that collaboration on a fixed base bring from one governance structure leading it? If that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, John. And thank you, Johnny. Yeah, some really good points there around clear shared vision, common goals, and capability culture influencing perceptions, which sort of I think helps to answer Ben's question as well. I mean, in some ways, the things we've seen, I mean, looking at the data again on people who gave low scores for how well it had gone, and what they had in common, I had the following sort of themes. One was, don't assume that shared values mean a shared culture. I think getting people working together and looking deeper to resolve culture clashes, leadership friction is really important. Don't consult people too late. Don't just tell and do it too late. Make it feel top down and not engaging. That was a pretty common theme in the ones that didn't go so well. Don't think that this is a sort of legal completion is the end of the project. Think about the benefits. As we said, it's all about the kids. Think about how we're going to make it all about the kids and get the benefits. And don't combine organizations without redesigning them, because otherwise you won't get the benefits, because you're basically just still running two parallel organizations, and if anything you may cause confusion. I think, sort of in a nutshell, I think the ones that were less successful tended to focus on the transaction, and the one that are more successful tend to focus on achieving some benefits that are not about merger, but are about the results of merger, and just keep laser focused on those would come out. Okay, just looking at the time, we've probably got chance for another discussion topic. I think we'll go with this one on consultation, because it did tend to be quite low rated, perhaps surprisingly so. And we'd like to sort of see this score improve, I guess, across the sector. So given that it was low rated, and that sense of involvement was what held it back from being better rated. What is the balance between strong leadership and meaningful consultation? At what point do leaders stop consulting and start deciding? And actually, at what point do leaders open up the tent for more people to be involved? Because obviously things can be very confidential and can be wrecked if there's disclosure too early on as well. So just interested in any experiences people want to share on that, either good or bad. Thank you. Looking for hands up or comments in the chat on your experiences with consultation from the people assembled.
Hi, John. I don't know if you can hear us.
Hello, hi, I can hear you, yeah.
Hello there. So it's Sandra James and Wendy Island. We're from Horncastle Education Trust. We are at the very early stages of talking about joining a larger trust, but we'd very much like to ask a question ourselves, if you don't mind. So we understand clearly the definition of informing and also consulting, but what's the middle ground in terms of being genuinely involved? Because this is something that we are very much placing a high focus on getting right as we move forward. But it's that difference between sharing information, involving in consultation as part of decision making. But what's that middle ground that people are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give again a personal take on this to see if John or others have comments. My personal take is find opportunities for engagement. So, for example, in a few sort of trust mergers, like actual mergers where the name has changed and there's been a sort of big collaboration to create a new feeling trust together. Look for those opportunities for teams to work together. It could be about looking at the two curricula and subject leaders getting together to do that. It could be about choosing the name. That's a great opportunity for engagement if you are planning on a name change. Obviously, it depends on the dynamics of the merger. If one trust is transferring into another and you're not changing the name, then that's a little different. But you could still look to engage people over sort of how are things going to look and feel after the merger, and try and do that within all kinds of different groups. So everyone's got a stake and a bit of participation in it, which is obviously a little different from formal consultation you may have to do over things like TUPE. And clearly you do need to kind of separate those two things. John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think most importantly, people want transparency, honesty. Now, if we think about just the decision making and keeping people up to date, if you think about three principles that underpin the process of change, number one, making sure that people have the agency, they know that they'll be able to contribute in some way, being clear on that. The second thing is, what's the level of mastery? How are people being prepared to go into the merger with the job that they're going to do? Will they feel equipped to do what they want to do? And thirdly, how do you make people feel that they belong during this process? So I think one of the things we're not always great about in the education world is our communication systems. Sometimes we just introduce stuff without giving people time to navigate it or pre-teach what's going to happen. And I think in the process of merger, setting out the best timeline with the communication points, including all the stakeholders and when people are going to hear things, that reduces the anxiety. You can create workflows and project boards of people being involved in certain decisions, but also making sure that those project boards are time focused. And sometimes the composition of those groups change. So you're not creating a hierarchy of, these people made the decision. But I think if you're looking at it like a project, you're involving people, you're communicating regularly. A lot of the communications in the education world are normally historic, we normally tell people what we've done in the last 6 weeks rather than saying, in the coming year, this is what's going to happen. We're going to tell you these things. You're going to be involved. You don't have to be involved, but we'll have a very open invitation for you to contribute in these certain areas. But I also think it's really important to tell people what they're not going to be involved in, because sometimes consultation is really information giving. So if you can tell, sell, share, consult in the process, then you can use those mechanisms to create healthy and reasonable engagement during a merger or an acquisition.
Thanks, John. I hope that was helpful. Lots to take in there. Don't worry, I'm going to share a contact information in a second if you want to find out more. First of all, just to tell people about this. So there's a CST Trust Leadership Masterclass, which John and I and others will be involved in delivering. So it's taking some of these themes, but going quite a lot deeper in terms of tools and templates. There's 3 sessions. They're all online. They take place across 3 weeks from the end of September. And they are for, similar audience to this webinar, really, CEOs, trustees, other senior leaders. And we'll go through, all the stages of merger from a twinkle in the eye to completed, and we're seeing benefits in the classroom. And you can book that through CST. And just a reminder, as I said at the start, our day job is helping people with this. So if you would like support or more information on anything we've talked about, please do get in touch. And that could be about mergers. It could be about reviewing where you are now, strategy development. So just give us a bell. We're very friendly, and there are the contact details, info at my number and Sophie's number. So thanks, John, for your contribution. Thank you, Sophie, for opening us up and recording it and acting as Houston to John's spaceship, getting him onto our airwaves. And thank you all very much for taking part. And I'm sure we'll see you next year, if not before.
Thanks, Chris.